Jason McLeod. I'm a seasoned paranormal investigator who began my career early, just out of high school, in 1990, working for and with the legendary Ed and Lorraine Warren, who are the pioneers of the modern paranormal investigation craze that thrives to this day. And I am blessed beyond measure to have been able to work with these astounding people who really opened the door for me to understand this unseen world that we are immersed in. As a child, I'd always believed that I am part of a flawless, intelligent design, that I'm an individuated aspect of Source Creator, the true creator of our souls, and that I was here to do astounding work and to fulfill a purpose that is now abundantly clear through this amazing series of events that have really shaped my life. And I use the word synchronicity rather than coincidence, because everything that has transpired in my life happened precisely when it was meant to, and not a moment earlier. And as an example, I'd read The Demonologist as a senior in high school because I was so fascinated with human spirits and what happens when we vacate the human body, and real cases of the paranormal. And it's the most terrifying case of real demonic activity that all could be corroborated in a court of law, because there were so many people in positions of authority who witnessed this activity. And the cases were absolutely horrifying. And I had feared for the families. I wasn't afraid, but I really was concerned for the children especially, who were suffering unbelievable attacks going on in their homes. Unbelievable for most people because they don't understand the nature and cause of this activity, which is something that I really was fascinated with and wanted to pursue. And I remember returning the book to the shelf, not interested at the point in working with Ed and Lorraine Warren, even though, because Connecticut is such a small state, most everybody knew the Warrens, and I was in Westport, Connecticut, so they were really only less than a half hour away. I was really not interested in getting involved at the time. I wasn't ready. So I returned the book to the shelf, and it wasn't until 4 years later I was with my friend Lou in his car. He was a former Army combat medic and a current paramedic at the time, working for the Norwalk EMS system. And we're in his car and we're listening to the radio, and on the radio was being discussed the 3 Men and a Baby incident, when they were in the editing phase of that film, and the camera panned to the left, and behind the curtain they saw the spirit of a teenage boy. And they all were completely disturbed and had no idea why there would be a teenage boy hiding behind the curtain. And when the camera panned to the right, the boy was holding a high-powered hunting rifle, and that wasn't there the first time the camera panned. And they called Ed and Lorraine Warren, and Lorraine discerned, because she's a light trance medium and clairvoyant, that this boy had committed suicide with a high-powered hunting rifle right there on that property. And I turned to Lou and I said, that would be so cool to work with them. And he said, yeah, no kidding. The very next evening, he called me and said, you aren't going to believe who just called me. And I asked, well, who? Ed Warren. And I said, come on. And basically, Ed was having heart issues. He was seeking a paramedic for their team. He called the chief of EMS, who recommended Lou because he was a former Army combat medic. And some of these cases are like combat situations, these horrific cases that I was telling you about previously in the referencing the demonology novel, the demonologist novel. And they invited Lou to their Monday night class in their home, in their museum. And I said, you have to get me in there. It's time. It wasn't time 4 years earlier, but it was time now. And I attribute that to the universal law of intention. When you're ready and it's meant to be, things will unfold in synchronistic fashion that will fulfill your desires, and especially if it's related to your purpose here on this earth. And this absolutely was my purpose. So Lou got to go to the meeting that Monday night. He met Ed and Lorraine Warren. He told Lorraine about this synchronicity, about he and I discussing this case in the car, and she knows all about synchronicities. And she said, well, invite Jason the following Monday. And I got to go that following Monday. And we arrived at the house and knocked on the door and opened the door, and I was greeted by a man named Drew Thompson, who's a friend of mine to this day. He was one of their original investigators. Very, very talented psychic, almost, I would say, as talented as Lorraine. And when I saw Lorraine in the distance, she had this big beaming smile, of course. And she said, "Hello, honey, I'm Lorraine Warren." And she asked me a very pointed question at that point. When she looked at me very seriously and stared at me, she asked, "How strong is your faith, honey?" And I instantly said, "Well, I have immense faith. I believe that I and my Creator are one. I and the Father are one." And she nodded and smiled. And she asked, "Why do you want to get involved in work of this nature?" And it was always of this nature. And I explained to her that I'd read The Demonologist, and it fascinated me, and I was frightened for the families, and I really wanted to be able to understand things better and to help them. And she asked, "Well, then it's a calling then?" And I said, "Well, yes, I believe it is." Especially when I thought about the whole synchronicity that took place. And she says, "Well, welcome inside, come on in, and we'll basically, we're going to be going over the cases that we're now involved in, and also looking at evidence that has been accumulated prior to your arrival." And it was just a fascinating game. It was like I entered the wizard's tower, and I got to sit there and be exposed to this incredible paranormal activity or phenomenon that was happening to people just like you or I. And what was most astounding is at the close of the evening, they announced that there was a new case that came to their attention, and it was a man and a woman, newlywed, who had purchased a house, an old house, and every evening they claimed a woman would walk through their wall in their bedroom, walk down the hallway, stop in front of their baby's crib, scare the baby out of its wits, walk through the crib, and pass right through the wall and disappear every evening. So, and what was most astounding to me is Ed and Lorraine Warren sent Lou and I on our very first case representing the Warrens by ourselves the next evening. And I'm like, what? So I went and borrowed my mom's camcorder. I'm dating myself. This is back in 1990. It was a big VHS camcorder. And I basically decided that this is exactly what I was supposed to be doing. And so we went to the home. I set up the tripod facing the wall where the couple would say that the woman would pass right through. I lit a candle for some illumination, drew all the blinds, and Lou and I and the husband and wife waited down the hallway in the baby's room, peering down the hallway, waiting to see this full-fledged apparition walk down the hallway like they said they've seen every evening. And we waited and we waited. And then a bright blue flash of light went off like it was a lightning flash. That's how bright it was. And we all just stared at each other with our jaws hanging slack. Did you see that? And we were waiting. I was thinking, oh, this is a portal opening, or it's a vortex or something, a doorway, and this woman's now going to walk down the hallway. But nothing happened. And we walked into the bedroom, and we smelled a sickly sweet almond smell. And we didn't know what to make of that. It wasn't overpowering, but it was definitely there. And we decided that we would retreat back into the baby's room and wait and see, when this woman would materialize. And again, 30 minutes later, we saw a bright blue flash of light. Interestingly enough, it was half as intense as it was the previous time. And upon re-entering the room, the smell was half as intense, this almond smell. And again, we retreated back into the baby's room and nothing happened for the remainder of the evening. So around midnight, we decided that we would call our investigation and basically leave. But we were all very curious to see what we would find on the VHS tape. So we inserted it into their VHS machine, and I fast forward it as we're playing. So you see the flickering candles and so forth. And there was no intense flash of light. I thought it would be so bright that we wouldn't even be able to tell where it originated from, but I was excited to believe that we were going to get phenomenal activity on the actual screen. And upon hitting play and waiting a minute or two, we heard my voice say, "We've just experienced the second flash of light." Nothing at all on the camera. And we all just looked at each other like we all saw that bright blue flash of light, like lightning went off in the room. And then Lou narrowed his eyes and identified a specific heartbeat rhythm on the VHS tape. "Do you hear that?" He asked, and he's trained to hear these things. We were not. Very, very faint heartbeat. Love-dub, love-dub. He identified that heartbeat. He identified a second type of heartbeat, a sinus diarthritic heartbeat and an arthritic heartbeat. He identified 3 different heartbeats, and he was literally white as a ghost. We didn't hear a thing until he pointed them out. And he was really spooked by that. Now, there was never any physical body close to the camera at the time that the heartbeats were being picked up, because we were all in the room down the hallway, nor was the camera sensitive enough to pick up a heartbeat even if somebody was present right near the camera. And when I returned the tapes to Lorraine Warren the next morning, and we all went over the case the following Monday evening, and Lorraine basically told us that indeed the woman was present in the home. She wasn't going to give us any evidence on tape, but she all gave us evidence that she was there. Now, how did this happen is the question that everyone is asking. At the time, I didn't know, and now I know, of course, and this makes perfect sense. But she projected that light, bypassing our physical eyes, directly into our pineal glands, which have been called throughout history the seat of the soul, the third eye. It's our multidimensional antenna that allows us to tap into these higher frequency bands. And it's got rods and cones, it's photosensitive, and it's how we see full color dreams when we're sleeping in a pitch black room in the evening with our eyes closed. That's how we see these images and these colors. And she projected that right into our third eyes. Now the heartbeat, she left purposely for Lou as a message for him and him alone, for he and he alone, on the camera. And that spooked him about halfway out the door completely, as far as whether or not he was going to continue working in this field. I was hooked, 100%. And because I knew it was my purpose. So the pineal gland is photosensitive and it receives higher vibrational frequencies. The human perception, the human eyes, are only able to perceive visible light, which is the tiny, tiny fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum. It's less than 1% of the matter, space, and energy around us. So we can see less than 1%, yet people say, well, if I can't see it, it doesn't exist. Well, that's completely ludicrous. And what we're dealing with here is vibration and frequency. And Nikola Tesla said that everything is vibration, everything is frequency. Albert Einstein said the same thing, and many famous people now who are all realizing these things understand this to be true. Quantum physics has turned Newtonian physics on its ear and has proven that nothing is physical, everything is vibrational state. So wrapping my hand on the armrest here is not a physical hand and a physical armrest, it's an electromagnetic state against an electromagnetic state. Our minds, which are the receivers of consciousness, not the origin of consciousness, are only able to piece together this reality that we find ourselves immersed in, but it's really only 1% of everything that's going on around us. So imagine the frequencies, the remaining 99%, and what that entails and what we're really interacting with. That always fascinated me. And it seemed that getting involved in this type of work, the work of this nature, as Lorraine called it, our sensitivities will increase. It's like your antenna just fine-tuning themselves. So Lorraine said, she says, the more you're involved in work of this nature, in quotes, the more your sensitivities will increase, and we'll find out what those become. Now there's clairvoyance, where we're able to see more of that 1% frequency band that the average human can see. There's clairaudience, which is the sound, picking up sounds and so forth that other people are unable to detect. Clairsentience, where you just know things. You just you won't hear a voice or you won't see an apparition. You'll just pick up or receive or intuit information. There's empathy, which is the ability to pick up emotion, and emotion is just energy in motion, and several others. But I wanted so badly to see a spirit, and it wasn't until we went on a case in Vermont, which I'm actually writing about now that Lorraine has passed, and it was the most profound experience that I've ever had working with the Warrens. And what was astounding was it was a case in Vermont. The family had fled the house in terror. They couldn't take it anymore. They couldn't take what was happening in their home, and horrific things. And we were all going to go up and investigate. Now I offered to drive my mother's brand new Caravan because she just bought a new vehicle, and I was the youngest, most enthusiastic individual, I guess, because I was brand new on the team. I offered to drive. And in the morning, I got up and I got into the minivan, and before I started it, I did something I'd never done, ever. And that is, I wash this van in the blood of Jesus Christ, that it is protected, and that everyone inside is protected, and that we arrive safely and soundly to our destination in Vermont and return safely back to Connecticut. I don't know why I said that at the time, but upon leaving and entering the Merritt Parkway, which is a beautiful scenic two-lane highway going north and southbound, the leaves were falling. It was a beautiful, beautiful day. I was in the left lane. It was very early in the morning, and all of a sudden I saw a black BMW coming up behind me, racing up behind me. And I thought, oh, it's, he's in a sports car. He's just going to scream by me, and that'll be that. I didn't bother turning over into the right lane. Well, he raced up to me and then remained parallel to the minivan. And I was very cautious at the time because I was a young man, and I was just really focused on the drive. And I was wondering, why is this car racing up and then stopping next to me? And then it pulled up about 2 car lengths and didn't go any faster. And I thought, well, that's really peculiar. And all of a sudden, it started to wobble, like shake, and then really shake, and then fishtail, and then really lose control. And then he went right into my lane, and I plowed right into him sideways, 90-degree angle, right into his door, crashed the van into his car, came to a shuddering halt, and I was unharmed. I got out. I really slammed on the brakes, obviously. I got out, and his window was all smashed, and he was spitting the breakaway glass out of his mouth. He wasn't cut, but it was the rounded edges. And he said, it's like I hit solid ice. And the state police arrived, and they said it was November 10th, 1990. In the morning, there was no ice. It wasn't cold enough. And they found his whole story completely, unreasonable. He got the ticket because he moved into my lane, but there were no cell phones at the time. And by the time I'd been given the all clear to go, the car was still drivable. I pulled off into Fairfield and found a payphone, and I called Lorraine Warren and explained, the reason that I'm late. Something happened. And she asked very pointedly, are you okay? And I said, well, I'm fine. The van's still drivable. She almost called the entire investigation off because they realized that the spirits in that house were doing what they could to prevent us from ever arriving there in the first place. What's fascinating is that these spirits know days beforehand who the investigators are going to be that actually intervene and help the families involved before the investigators themselves ever become aware of the case. The Warrens have experienced all kinds of attacks days before they ever got the phone call. And that's because of the power level that we're dealing with these inhuman diabolical spirits that are operating beyond space and time. They're outside of this third dimension. They're not operating with the same laws that we are bound by here in this experience, in this density or dimension. So they almost called the entire investigation off. By the time I arrived, there were 6 other investigators, 5 others, including me, sorry. And they were joking and looking at their watches, and they were joking with me and claiming maybe that I fell asleep or slept in and didn't make it in time. But when I walked inside, Ed asked me very seriously, am I still up for making this journey? And I said, yes, I'm fine. This is really interesting. And he tapped me and said, see, Lorraine, I told you he's tough. But I was just very enthused. And I always have felt protected. And I now understand why I blessed the van, because if I hadn't, maybe these entities would have taken control of the van that I was driving and caused me to veer off the road or cause much more damage than they could. But because I blessed it, and we all have the ability to call upon the power of our Creator, the source of all life and of all consciousness, to protect us against entities that seek to do us harm. It's against universal law for anybody to injure anybody else or to harm anybody else without our consent. And if they do it, then they have to deal with the ramifications. But because either my guides or my angels or something nudged me or convinced me to issue that prayer to protect the van and the occupants there and back, I really honestly strongly believe that that's what happened and that the van was protected. They took control of the black car. Now, colors are vibrational frequencies. The low frequencies are the dark black colors. The higher frequencies are the brighter colors. So, as we'll discuss when this, as we continue, since everything is about vibration, there has to be a frequency bridge for these entities to be able to connect with and control or manipulate certain people, certain situations, and colors have something to do with that. Because it was a black car, I believe it was easy for them to take control of. The man had no understanding about the spiritual nature of the accident that occurred, but we all did, and that's why Lorraine almost called the entire investigation off. But we arrived up to Vermont, and it was very cold up there. We turned on the heat in the house. It was a full moon that evening, and we went into the field. And what the story was, it was this woman who was going into labor. She was being rushed by horse and wagon to the house where the midwife was awaiting to help deliver the baby. And in their haste to get to the house, the wagon flipped. The body of the woman was mangled, as was the baby. And they both lost their lives. And the woman's last thought, as she was, going into labor, was get to the house, deliver the baby. And there she went. So there she's remained. And she is just one of the spirits that were being seen inside the house. There were other very negative spirits we found out later who were also there to basically take control of the situation. There's always, if things go on for a very long time, there are very often very dark, malevolent spirits, sometimes even inhuman spirits, who actually seek to control those human spirits, sap their energy, and control the situation. And that's indeed what was happening, and that's why the family was so terrified. Things that were happening to them which boggled their minds. Again, things that are beyond the normal 1% that we can see in visible light. And how do you make sense of that unless you understand it, is the question. And so we were in the field, and two of the investigators got phenomenal photographs all the time. We call him Ecto Joe, because when he and one of the other investigators got in the camera lens together, they would always get this white, milky ectoplasm coming out of people. And actually, if they took photos long enough, they would start to congeal and start with a ball, into a cigar shape, into like a bowling pin shape, into a full form that was starting to materialize. And if they waited long enough, and if there was enough energy in the atmosphere to be used, they would actually get a full apparition. And I actually was handed the camera at one point. It was high-speed infrared film at the time, and we were outside. And about where that camera is, ahead of me, I would be snapping photos, and it would say, check distance, and they said, take the photo quick. Something was being registered, even though there was nothing in between us, that there was something obscuring the lens, or there was something too close. So it snapped the photos, and the photos we got were incredible. But when we were finished, and we decided we'd be walking back to the house, I was the last one in the group, and I felt something was behind me, and I felt this woman was there. And I couldn't explain it, it was just a feeling. And I turned back, and I said, come back to the house with us. And to her, he could see me. I made a connection with this guy. To me, I couldn't see her, I just felt like she was there. And how many of us all of a sudden feel like a tingling in the top of our head, or we decide to turn around and we see somebody staring at us? It's because our psychic perceptions are picking that up. So I felt that this woman was behind me, interacting with me in some way. So I wanted to basically invite her back to the house, because that is where we were going to start initiating communication. And unbeknownst to me, I made a connection with her, and she was fascinated with that and knew that I was in some way able to basically interact with her and share the message with the group. And we went back to the house. We all sat around a giant Amish farm table, and Ed Warren started talking and asked the spirits to make us aware of their presence. Lorraine was seeing a tall man walk in with a big black top hat. Andy described a woman. They described this woman that they saw and knew her to be the woman, Priscilla was her name, who had lost her life when she was being taken to the house to deliver the baby. And my response was, I want to see. I really wanted to be able to see a spirit and really have that incredible experience for myself, but I didn't. And when we were initiating communication, the table started to wobble, just like the car started to wobble, and started to shake, and started to really vibrate, and started literally bouncing on all four legs very subtly, and then more pronounced, and then literally like it was bouncing on all four legs. And one investigator, this other Joe, was screaming, "It's coming, it's coming!" I have the audio cassette of this case as this is unfolding, and they're trying to make the table lift and have the spirits lift the table, and they were all saying, "Lift, lift." Andy, or Drew, leans back in his chair and literally should have fallen over, but he didn't. It was like something was just pulling his chair out from under him and he was leaning back. And all of a sudden, my jaw dropped and tears just streamed down my face. And I'm on record, I'm on the audio cassette going, "Lorraine, the sadness." I could not believe the grief that I felt. And guys can hold back tears, but I was just streaming tears down my face, and my jaw was just hanging slack, and I was overcome by this grief and sadness that I'd never experienced before in my life. And it all stopped, and Lorraine's going, "Oh my God." And Ed said that wasn't a human spirit that was lifting and pounding the table that way. And I had my first truly incredible psychic experience. I mean, the blue flash of light was amazing, and I wanted to see so badly, but my psychic ability was not to be clairvoyance, it was empathy. And I picked up the emotion that this woman was experiencing since the point where she had lost her child. Now, outside of this third dimension or density, there is no space or time. So to her, it just happened. Even though this event happened over 100 years ago. It's not like she was wandering the house for 100 years in grief. I mean, how awful would that be? But it was her state of mind and state of being at that point, because to her it just happened. And all of a sudden we're all in the house together. "Where's my baby? Where's my baby?" is what she was feeling. And that case really started to get hairy later in the evening, because people actually were being pushed or shoved as they're walking down the stairs. Not violently where they would tumble down and injure themselves, but literally something saying, "Get out, we don't want you here," in essence. And when Lorraine decided that it was getting too dangerous and we'd better leave, I walked into the foyer and put on my shoes, and all of a sudden my jaw dropped and tears just streamed down my face again, and I was overcome for the second time with this grief, because she and I had made a connection. She thought that I could help, and she realized that we were all leaving. She wasn't going to get the help that she so greatly desired. It happened 3 more times on the drive home to Connecticut, where I literally would turn on the dome light because I was driving, and tears just streaming down my face, and they would white light me or Christ light me. So how did this happen? How did I become so vulnerable to this discarnate, earthbound human spirit's grief? I had made the connection with her behind me when I invited her to make a connection with me, and as this table's bouncing all over the floor, on the floor, and people are freaking out in several different ways, and activities being seen all over, it's not that I was afraid, but I was definitely alarmed and maybe even overwhelmed a bit. But when you're experiencing fear or terror or a similar emotion, you tend to get these little micro holes in your auric fields, and then they can slip in, and really just you can start to pick things up. And my antennae were being tweaked because there were so many spirits around. So that's why this happened. And she explained to me that, I did make the connection with her, even though that might not have been the wisest thing to do. It changed my life forever. Seeing a spirit, if I saw the spirit with the man in the top hat in the house, that would have been great validation for me. But to completely change my life and steer me toward helping others and helping families, especially dealing with these spirits and entities, helping earthbound spirits cross over correctly, Rain always called them earthbound because they're electromagnetically bound to the persons or places or situations or circumstances of their former physical lives. And they can't let go of these situations, and they remain there in their true form, which is awareness, their true spirit body, which is awareness without form. Getting back to quantum physics, nothing is solid, everything is vibration. They're vibrating outside of the range of our normal human senses to decode, because they're outside of that 1% visible light spectrum bandwidth that the normal human beings are able to perceive. But they're very conscious, they're very real. What was fascinating to me was another synchronicity, and something that absolutely happened because it was meant to. I wanted to go to Emerson College for English creative writing in Boston, and my father was paying for my college education, and he basically decided that I would never make it as an author, and he wanted me to get a communications degree at a state university. So he made me go to Easton Connecticut State University. And for English 101, the entire freshman class, 1986, had to read Dr. Raymond Moody's Life After Life book, which is, he's an amazing hypnotherapist, one of the most famous near-death experience hypnotherapists, and he wrote a book about his most fascinating cases. Now, why in the world would an entire freshman class in college have to read a book about near-death experiences as English 101 required reading? It made no sense, but the synchronicity was there. And that changed my life, because it was my first glimpse into recent, astounding near-death experiences. One of the most interesting accounts in my near-death experience studies involved an 18-year-old young man with his best friend whitewater rafting, and they hit rapids and the raft flipped over. The friend was propelled closer to shore, but this individual who had a near-death experience was basically propelled into the water and then pinned to the riverbed by the weight of this waterfall that had caused the raft to flip, and he couldn't get out. And he struggled and he struggled, and he says, I can't get out, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna run out of breath. And when he finally succumbed to the fact that this was his end, he breathed in the water, and he felt warmth, and he felt peace, and he felt like his arms were contracting until he had no arms, and he felt like his legs were contracting until he had no legs, and his head contracting until he was nothing more substantial than a ball of energy. And he shifted his awareness upward, skyward, and willed himself to rise up out of the water, and so he did. But felt like he was nothing more than just a sphere, a ball, and everything was scintillating. The colors were amazing. The sounds were incredible. Now, he damaged his physical ear when he was 6 in a firecracker explosion, and he had very limited hearing, yet he can hear perfectly, clearly. He saw colors that he couldn't even describe upon his return, because these colors don't exist for us here in this 1% bandwidth of visible light. So when people have near-death experiences, they see colors, they see geometric patterns, they see entities, they hear voices, they hear music, they feel emotions. They're connected on such a vast level compared to what we are able to perceive in the physical body. But he would see these colors, and he could hear perfectly clearly out of the ear that he had damaged, even though he had no physical ears. He could see these remarkable colors, even though he knew his body was beneath him, under the water, where his physical eyes were. And he could put it all together and discern what he was hearing and seeing, even though his body and his mind were pinned below the water. Now, how is this possible? It's because we are consciousness. We are fields of awareness who temporarily take on a physical form, even though it's just a very dense vibration, to experience this third dimensional reality or density that we're in, a band of frequencies. And when you vacate the body or that band of frequencies and the insulation that the body provides, you're free of all of the limitations of that body. So when people have these near-death experiences, they can't even describe to others what that experience was truly like, because there's no frame of reference whatsoever. So that explains also why people who have had paranormal experiences or UFO experiences, they're all interrelated because they're all related to higher vibrational frequency bands. When they try to explain these incredible encounters to others around them, it's next to impossible, and most people don't even believe a word of it. So it's really difficult for people to come forward and explain these things, and it's really difficult to come forward for people who are having horrible, devastating attacks by these unseen spirits in their homes to come forward to the public or to their neighbors or their friends, because they'll all be ridiculed. And the level of ridicule and the level of scorn that has taken place with regard to all of this phenomena, whether it's Sasquatch phenomena or UFOs or paranormal experiences or cryptids or fairies or any of the mythology that has taken place or have been passed down through the millennia, it's very, very difficult for people to be taken seriously. Unfortunately, it's the reverse. These people are fortunate enough in many cases to have been able to experience things that the majority of the population of this planet will not. And they should be celebrated if their accounts are true. But this boy, this young man, felt like he was a ball, a sphere of energy. His arms and legs contracted, his head contracted. So what do we see in many of these photographs? Orbs, right? Spheres. Lorraine always called them ghost lights, little tiny specks in many cases, a bright violet speck. Again, color is frequency. Violet is very high frequency. Ghost lights, orbs, floating around. They're not all dust balls or dust particles. There's an incredible field now where people are actually able to take phenomenal photos and get faces and shapes, full forms inside these ghost lights, these orbs, orb photography. And I've seen many of them, and they're phenomenal. But unless and until people have experienced these things for themselves, or unless they just simply understand reality and consciousness, they won't quite get it. And they'll just laugh and think it's ridiculous. And again, it's the people that don't understand that we're literally as blind as a bat as a human being without even having sonar. Cats and dogs are able to perceive, as are horses, able to perceive much more of the electromagnetic spectrum than the human body can. So when you see a dog or cat growling or hissing or staring at the corner or running away because they sense something's in the room, and the human says, "Oh, stupid cat, stupid dog, what do you?" They're experiencing things that we can't perceive. So we should always trust our animal companions, especially if they're in our home, because they are our first line of defense when something will come in and invade or infest the house. So when we were finished and we got home from Vermont, I was in my parents' house in Westport, and I was writing a column called Hauntings for the Sacred Heart University Spectrum newspaper. I had gone to Sacred Heart to pull my grades up because I wanted to transfer out to a really good creative writing school. Because the school was a Catholic college, the students there were fascinated with what Ed and Lorraine Warren were experiencing and documenting, because they were Catholics themselves and approached everything from that perspective. And I had been writing, this was Sunday, and I was writing for the column about this phenomenal case and about this experience that I had, which was this empathic experience. And I decided I would call Lorraine, and I said, "Hello Lorraine, this is Jason. I just wanted to thank you, for taking me on that case, or letting me participate rather. It was just fascinating." And I asked when we're going to go back. And she said, "Well, we haven't even unpacked yet. We haven't even gone over the footage that we filmed, and there's no plans to go back at this point." And I said, "Well, thank you very much. Have a good night and rest up and everything. And I'll see you tomorrow night at the class." And I started to write some more on the computer, and literally less than a minute later, I called her back. And I said, "Lorraine, it's Jason, and I really feel strongly that we should go back there as soon as possible." She said, "Jason, the family fled the house. We have no way to contact them." Again, there was no cell phones. There was no texting going on. And I explained, "Well, I understand. I'm sorry to bother you again. I don't know. I'll talk to you. I'll see you tomorrow night." I hung up. Type. less than a minute later, I called back. Lorraine, she said, Jason, are you writing about this case for the column? And I said, well, yeah. And she said, you're drawing her right to you. This woman that I had this connection with, this empathic connection with. And I wasn't crying at that point, but it was like she was behind me saying, call Lorraine, come back and help me. Because we really didn't resolve anything up there. We collected data and we left because it was getting too dangerous and people could have gotten hurt. But that's how these things occur. And it should help people understand. There was a phenomenal book called The Unquiet Dead by Dr. Edith Fiore. That's one of my favorite books when I first started delving into this field before I started working with the Warrens, before that incredible synchronicity happened. And she had been hypnotizing people and at the same time hypnotizing the spirits who were actually cohabitating their bodies. And it's not possession. Possession is when you have an inhuman spirit come in and actually push it, who's able to penetrate the multiple layers of our auric fields, we'll get into that, and actually push aside the consciousness that it rightfully animates that body and take control of it. Cohabitation is when you'll have a discarnate human spirit weave its way into your fields, like this Priscilla did to me, where I can't differentiate my thoughts from hers. So she influenced me to call Lorraine 3 times in a row within a 3-minute period, asking for help and asking that we return to Vermont immediately. If she had her way, we would have all packed in the car and headed right back up there. At the time, I didn't know how to help her. Now I do. And I would, and I could, obviously. But then, in my beginning stages of understanding these things, I was quite, disturbed by it. And I wasn't threatened. I didn't feel violated or any such thing. But the Edith Fiore book, The Unquiet Dead, would actually deal with human spirit cohabitation, where people's thoughts would not be their own. People's personalities would change in an instant. They would have, confusion. They wouldn't understand that why they liked these foods that they never liked in the past, or why they're attracted to somebody that they normally wouldn't be attracted to, or what, they just bizarre personality changes that take place. And she would actually hypnotize that spirit and talk to the spirit in a very compassionate way, which is, again, something that I think that I learned or gleaned from her, in that she would talk to this individual who was a discarnate human spirit who never crossed over properly or returned to the highest spiritual dimensions from which we originate, into which we all shall return. We have the opportunity to return to, should we choose to do so. They would remain earthbound. For instance, somebody who's an alcoholic who needs a drink. I won't be able to get an alcoholic drink if I cross over and return to heaven or the highest spiritual dimension, so I'm going to go to the bar. And there they go. Just like Priscilla went right to the house, which is where she was focused on to deliver the baby, the spirit could be in a bar, it could be on the moon, it could be under the ocean, it could be in Europe, it could be in the United States, simply by thinking about being there. And that's how fast they'll go, because we're consciousness. There is no separation when you're outside of this body. It really helped me understand the nature of the situation when people have vacated their bodies and they're in a state of duress or trauma, or they have a need they can't fulfill. They'll seek to fulfill that need through the living. And all of a sudden that individual who never craved an alcoholic drink in his or her life is now convinced that they need to go to the bar and order this very specific drink. And it's like that spirit is receiving or tasting that beverage when they're drinking and consuming it. And that's where these addictions could come from. The people can be very strongly determined not to succumb to an addiction, yet it's another intelligence that's saying, drink another drink, or have another smoke, or go do this, or go do that. And it's a fascinating situation where you can actually hypnotize the individual, as Edith Fiore did, hypnotize the spirit and say, listen, you're interfering with the life experience that this consciousness decided to come and have here on this earth. You have no right to interfere with that individual's life. You lost your body. Do you remember the time, and this is something I do in cases, in fact I'll do this evening, is actually address the spirits that are in the house and ask them if they can remember the time when they first found themselves outside of their physical bodies, and how strange that felt, and how maybe disorienting it was, or how frightening it was. But then they came to the realization that, hey, I'm still me. There's my body mangled in the car wreck. There's my body as I'm looking down from the ceiling on the operating table, witnessing the entire operation that's gone awry. My body is not breathing any longer, but I'm okay. I'm me. I can see myself. You're a finer substance. You are vibrating outside of the range of those still embodied to decode. You can pass through walls. You can walk through, and you'll try to pick up a glass of water. Your hand will pass right through it, but then you quickly realize you don't even need water any longer, nor do you require food or a visit to the bathroom or a shower or any of the things that our bodies need to thrive and to live. You are consciousness at that point. And the most profound understanding that anybody can ever come to realize from any of my presentations or lectures or on their own is to understand that you're not the body. You are not the body. Who were you before you came here? That's the greatest question there is. Who are you? Where are you from? Where did you come from? Who were you before you came into this life? Where are you going when your body ceases to function? We're eternal fields of consciousness, individuations of the totality of the whole. I use the analogy of the sun, right? If the sun is the creator, the source of our souls, we are all individual sparks cast off from that sun. Exactly like the whole, we will become exactly like the whole, just like cells that divide from the host cell become exactly like the host cell, don't they? So we are godlings in the making, but we're eternal fields of consciousness that are created for a purpose, and we're here to experience what our soul seeks to experience. The mind can decide what it's here for, or decide what its wants and needs and desires are, but the mind is the receiver of consciousness. Our soul, or our oversoul, our soul, or the higher multidimensional versions of ourselves, are the ones dictating what we need to experience for our own evolution. So you can imagine what it's like to be handicapped and live a life of limitation. Or you can imagine what it's like to be a superstar athlete like Tom Brady, or to be rich beyond average, or to be homeless on the street, or to be a priest, or to be a prostitute. Any of the multitude or myriad experiences that we can experience, everybody experiencing this lifetime here right now chose on their highest level to experience whatever it is that they're experiencing for their own growth and their own evolution. And nothing is so awful that we can't overcome it. And when we come to the understanding that we are fields of awareness who came here for a specific purpose, and that no matter what happens to the body, our consciousness is completely unscathed and continues on with the full memory of the experiences that we've had, and that there is no such thing as death, that nobody in the history of the world has ever died. They've simply changed form. They've left the physical container or the spacesuit with which to experience this reality, and they've gone on. And then they choose whether they want to incarnate again, or meaning take form again, on whatever level of or density or vibration that is best suited to fulfill that need to evolve. They could stay as a disembodied field of awareness in the highest spiritual dimensions, or to wherever it is that they vibrate most profoundly, or choose another adventure. It's fascinating stuff. But the most important thing to understand is that you're not the body, you're not the name given you by your parents. You are not. I am not Jason. I am not 6'6". I'm not Caucasian. I am not an author or a paranormal investigator. I am not Republican or Democrat. I am not gay or straight. I am not any of the things that we associate with regard to this particular lifetime. These are all just aspects of the current experience that we're having. Not male, female, right? The spirit or the soul is genderless. Ed Warren always said the angels and the demons and the devils and all, they're all genderless because they've never embodied in a physical form where we have two genders. And I'm not going to get into the whole gender thing, but in reality, we're a combination of masculine and feminine energies, and that's what makes such a beautiful diversity among the population here on this planet, is that we're all from, and most of us come from places that aren't even associated anywhere close to Earth. Dr. Francis Crick, who's the discoverer of DNA, is on record saying that our DNA did not originate here on Earth. So that's a big mind blower right there. If people understood that, you know, we're just like we can see 1% of the electromagnetic spectrum, Earth is not the only planet in the universe, and the universe is not the only universe. There's a multiverse, and that would limit the creator to say that there's only a specific number of universes or planets or galaxies and so forth, or levels of consciousness and things. The things that truly exist beyond our range of perception are so mind-bogglingly awesome that we probably will never experience all of it, but we'll continue going for as long as we choose to. And what's the ultimate goal is to know and understand that I am an individuation of the totality of the Creator. I'm here to experience the highest, grandest vision of the greatest version of who I can be, and to understand that I'm never separate. Ever since I was a little boy, and since I walked in that door to the first demonic case I went on with Ed Warren, I knew that I'm protected by my Creator. I wasn't going to provoke anything. I wasn't going to stand and challenge it in the name of Jason McLeod, but I knew that I was protected. My first demonic case that Ed Warren took me on, he invited me into his car, and we took a drive, and we passed by this house, and we stopped and we looked at it, and he explained to me that this house is infested with demonic spirits. How do you feel about that? He asked me. And I looked at the house and I said, it feels a little strange now that I look at it, but I can't really discern anything that's noticeable other than the feeling being off. So we walked inside, and it was an older home, and we walked through the living room, and it felt heavy. Couldn't really understand it, what I was feeling. Just like it felt like a heavy energy, like it was the air was thick. And upon entering the kitchen, he pointed toward the doorway to the cellar, and he says, "Down there." And he opened the door. So I walked down the stairs, slowly, into the basement, stood there. He turned off the light switch and closed the door, and I hear him chuckling on the other side of the door. Now, I could have freaked out and went, "What?" and ran up the stairs and freaked out, pounded on the door, let me out, let me out. But I knew it was a test. And I said, okay, I've had this incredible empathic experience. What do I feel here in this basement? Can I sense anything? Can I pick up anything that's, outside of that 1% that we can normally perceive? And I really didn't feel that much. And about a couple minutes later, I heard the door open and he turned on the light and, he said, "Come on up." And I think I earned Ed Warren's trust that day, or earned his respect that day, because I'd remained so cool-headed about it. And he asked me if I'd feel comfortable spending the night in the house. And I said, "I don't think that would be in my best interest." And he patted me on the shoulder. He says, "Always trust your instincts." And we left. And I think that was my test, to see if I could handle the real deal, whether that was the real case or not. And the most interesting real experience that I had, that I actually had an experience, was when we went on into a case. It was Drew, myself, Donna, and Joe, and we went to this home. sat on the sofa. I took my grandmother's blessed rosary beads. They were actually glow-in-the-dark plastic rosary beads, and I had them in my pocket. And she was Catholic, obviously. And we were sitting on this sectional, and all of a sudden, Drew and Donna said, there's a form standing on the stairway that's blacker than black. And I pulled out the rosary beads out of the pocket and stuck them in my hand. And a millisecond later, Andy goes, Jason, what did you do? And then Donna said, he has rosary beads. Said, put them away, quick. Apparently, me taking those rosary beads out of my pocket, the thing went right up to me. I didn't feel it. I didn't sense it. I didn't feel much at all. And they said, put them away, quick. So I'm fumbling with them because they're long to put into my palm and stick back into my pocket. And upon doing so, the thing went right back up to the stairs where it was. And upon discussing that case at the Monday night meeting, I asked, well, what could have happened? And he said, by pulling those with rosary beads out, you were challenging it. My faith against yours. Me against you. But that wasn't my intention. And I know that intention is everything. I intended to protect myself in a way, but I didn't intend to provoke anything and challenge anything, especially that I couldn't see, something that I couldn't see or really understand at that point early on in my career. But I asked, what could it have done? And Ed said it could have choked you, it could have burned you, it could have teleported you if it was strong enough. Teleported me. People, pets specifically, and sometimes people, disappear before people's eyes in some of these most heinous, diabolical cases into the woods or far away, and that's the first time I've heard of that, aside from reading the demonologist book. And we were in another case in another house, and I actually had to use the bathroom, and I didn't want to use the bathroom in the house because that was a focal point of where activity was happening to this family. So I said, I don't want to put myself in that danger. So I walked down the street to the Dunkin' Donuts, came back about 15 minutes later. They were all completely freaked out and thought that I might have been teleported somewhere or something happened to me or never to be seen again. And they were very serious about it. And I took that seriously because the people that worked with the Warrens were very serious. They wanted to help people. Sure, they wanted to understand these things better and to have experiences for themselves so that they could truly know that this is real. But their intention was to help, always. And these people that I've worked with them that are my friends to this day are phenomenal individuals. And I converse with them, and we're actually discussing co-writing or collaborating on this case that I talked about up in Vermont. It's serious, and we are always very serious and dedicated to helping families deal with these situations that were absolutely mind-boggling. After I pulled my grades up at Sacred Heart University, I found Eastern Washington University out in the West Coast, which had a phenomenal creative writing program, and all the professors were published authors. It was very inexpensive, which pleased my father because he was footing the bill, and I decided to transfer out there. Upon transferring out to Washington State, Eastern Washington, which was in the Cheney-Spokane area on the eastern edge, I got a call from Lorraine Warren asking me to investigate a case in Rathdrum, Idaho, just across the border, on their behalf for the first time as their lead investigator. And I was thrilled. And at the time I was president of my fraternity, Sigma Phi Epsilon, and I was very well known on campus, and of course with fraternity and so forth. And when I became aware of this case and announced that I was going to be involved in it, everybody was just, on pins and needles wanting to know what was going on. I had taken my friend Randy, who was a huge football player, because he was really serious about, wanting to get involved and help people. And I thought that, he must have been just like me when I was first wanting to get involved, serious about helping. He's a devout Christian. And he and I went to this house, and the family had been experiencing phenomenon. And we drove all the way out there in my Pontiac Fiero. Yes, I can fit in a Pontiac Fiero. It was like a little go-kart, great on gas. And he was 6'5" as well. It's pretty funny, these two giants getting out of this tiny black car. But when I arrived at the house, the phone rang, and it was a friend of the family who owned a crystal store in Spokane who very much wanted to meet me. So I talked to her for a bit, and I said I'd be happy to come and see you, on such and such date. And when I went and actually met with her, again, synchronicity, I knew it was meant to be. I befriended this woman, Barbara, and her best friend, Valerie, and their friend, who was a scientist of unbelievable ability, who worked with frequencies and electromagnetics, and even Royal Raymond Rife technology. They became three of my closest friends and my mentors in many ways, who opened my spirituality on levels that were just would boggle my mind. And Bruce is now passed, the scientist, and Barbara and I have had some differences, but Valerie is one of my closest friends to this day. And I called them my psychic moms because they were about 20 years older than I was. And the experiences that we had were just fantastic, and be happy to discuss those at some point too. But the case in Idaho really was my first introduction to dealing with and defeating dark forces. And it involved more than demonic presence, but there was a satanic element. The area was heavily involved in cult activity. The family was involved in cult activity, and it's very hard to leave that situation once you're involved. There were Indian spirits all over the place. There's a spirit of a little boy who had been sacrificed. He was hanging out and was terrified and hiding in a bush and so forth. It was a huge expansion of my awareness related to the types of activity that can go on and the types of spirits that can be in an area together, affecting not only the home and the family that I was called to investigate, but all the nearby houses and the land itself. And Bruce actually discerned and discovered that there was a barrier over the entire area that was caused by railroad tracks, ley lines, and power lines that were preventing anybody from crossing off of this dimension or this density and returning to the highest spiritual dimension. So they were all trapped, multiple generations, and it was fascinating. And I'm writing about that, and it's called a Dark Siege Rage in Rathdrum.